Hey, everybody, welcome back to the other guys on the Badlands Podcast Network. I'm your host today in the host chair, Paul Kilgallen, with my good friend Dan. We just had a little bit of a false start because I think we were still set up to live stream from the draft the other night. So I clicked it and then I realized we were probably live streaming on YouTube and I had to start over again. And it's already weird for me to be in Jake's spot here in the host chair. So hot start for Dan and I this morning. Dan, how are you? What's going on?
I'm chilling. It's the morning after draft weekend. Everybody's trying to take it all in, and everyone's eventually getting to cooler heads or getting to reality after the madness of the weekend.
Yeah, and so I mean, obviously, I'm sure that there's a big sense of relief for you since you're kind of uh, you're the structure behind everything that happens here with Badlands in terms of the draft coverage. Like, it's great that we all kind of put in the work on the players, but without the platform, none of it really happens. And so I'm sure there's a massive sense of relief that all your stuff worked and we're in good shape, and you put together a pretty cool wrap up of it on the other side. Now, like, I think generally people are feeling like by the numbers and by the grades, day three was pretty poor. And there's a sense of worry that developed where like the vibe shifted from Friday to Saturday in such a dramatic way over a 24-hour period. And I think a lot of it was like grade based. And so if you will, can you give me your kind of take on the draft as a whole and like any thoughts you have on the numbers and the grades we see on paper and like the draft value chart and all things like that. And then if there's any difference between that and just like the eye test, like, do you think that there's something hidden here that the coaches did well and that the front office did well that maybe isn't captured by those numbers, or are we, or is the vibe shift appropriate?
So it's the thing. I feel like with day three, and we'll talk about. We'll have that value summary coming out. I don't think we've dropped the link yet, so y'all will see it eventually. Probably by the time you see this pod. Um, but I think that the thing about day three that I think a lot of people tend to overlook, sometimes willingly, just because it's the easier way to stomach, you know, some decisions that are made. But sometimes it's just like you're putting too much trust sometimes in people. Day three is not that hard. And I say that with like a massive asterisk. You're not meant to find a Hall of Fame player on day three, right? But you are meant to move the floor of your roster up, right? And so the best way to do that is that you take the highest likelihood of success, right? And that does take into consideration your scheme and the type of offense or defense that you're going to run. So that is a big caveat. We do not know what type of offense the Jets are going to run yet, really. We have a sense of the type of defense that Aaron Glenn's going to run. And again, it's the same thing with how the Saleh regime began. A lot of the defensive players taken, you're kind of like, yeah, I can kind of see how this is going to work out. Although we'll talk about one area that we're really trying to figure out how it's gonna play out on the field. But with Aaron Glenn, it's a little bit more of a known thing in terms of what they're going to do schematically, whereas on offense, it's not. So I think with a lot of the day three selections, right, we don't. It wasn't necessarily the highest probability in those picks, and I think that's why you start to worry, because once you get into a situation where you're basically saying, I know better than every other team in the league, and I alone can make this work, even though none of them think that they can, you're in a dangerous position, because it's usually never the case. And draft like analysis and watching film and all that stuff, a lot of the times you are going to be on the same page with another team, right? And when you're not, you should be very concerned or just ultimately sure, right? And so, yeah, for a lot of this, we'll just have to see how it turns out in the end. But yeah,
Yeah, and I feel like the thing you weren't saying out loud there in that last couple of sentences, we were talking about Arian Smith. And so I think that a quote came out from Glenn after the draft, kind of comparing the chance being taken on Arian Smith to the chance taken on Jamison Williams, which I personally did not love. I don't think any of us really loved it because when we're talking about the risk taken with Jamison Williams, we were talking about mostly injury risk, but we were talking about a top level college program
Yes.
player who's probably going top of the first round. Um, it's not fair to compare the chances taken on those two players to each other. And I think the quote to me rang a little hollow when you're talking about, oh, well, I fixed one, we could fix the other. I just, I don't know if that lands for me. So we'll see there. We also, we signed a defensive tackle this morning out of Clemson, who is, I admittedly don't know a ton about, but he's 6'4", he's 300 pounds. His name is Peyton Page.
Yeah.
So I think that's one that, like, hopefully among the UDFAs and the Leonard Taylors and Eric Watts and McGregors of the world, like, maybe there is more of a plan there than we thought. I thought we were all pretty disappointed with not addressing that need in a particularly deep class. But then again, maybe the fact that the class was so deep made them feel more comfortable going into the UDFA pool and saying, well, it's so deep that we don't even need to use a spot on one of them. We could just sign one of them after. That's probably hopium, but I'm trying to spin things positive here as best I can. So the real purpose of this podcast, what we're trying to get at here, is what's going on with the secondary. And I think 3 transactions in particular between free agency and the draft. And we're talking, of course, about Brandon Stevens, Malachi Moore, and Azareye'h Thomas. And where do those players fit into what we're doing here? And there's a bigger conversation. I think Zach Rosenblatt put out an early 53-man prediction on The Athletic this morning. I actually have not gotten a chance to read it yet, but I am particularly interested in it because I want to see how he cut up the secondary. And I think the bigger conversation is who is on this team, but the more laser focused one is, out of those, let's say top 5 or 6 players, who's playing where and what's doing where. And that you pointed out when we were texting about this last night, that the easiest way to map it is probably looking at traits between who is in the Lions secondary and who is in the Jets secondary. But the problem with that is that they didn't really have a Michael Carter. And so we're trying to kind of like figure out what the plan is. And there's 3 players that have a little bit of positional flexibility. There are 2 players on the outside that really are, it's not fair to call them one-trick ponies, but there's one thing that they're really, 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 really good at that you almost probably never want to take them out of. So let's start with your kind of high-level view on what you think is going on and what you think the alignment could look like.
Yeah, so I think that we kind of texted about this a lot in the group chat and to each other. The Brandon Stevens thing becomes like the interesting situation, because I think Brandon Stevens' flexibility is one thing that, at least when he was signed initially, no one really thought about, except for you. So he had safety experience. He played a little safety with the Ravens, right? And so ultimately they said, like, no, just play on the outside. They didn't really do much in the slot with him either. They threw Marlon Humphrey in there, which is a good example of an outside corner having the flexibility to play inside a little bit, right? But that hasn't necessarily been Stevens. He's been an outside corner with the flexibility to play safety. So I think with that in mind, it likely looks like Sauce Gardner on the outside, continuing his role, best man cover that they have. They're going to play a lot of man. He's going to love that. He's going to love get his hands on people early. I think that you're probably going to have Azareye'h Thomas on the outside as well. I don't think he is very athletic. However, I think that his best skill set, if you want to make somebody comfortable early on, is you just play them on the outside. I don't think Aaron Glenn is going to be scared about playing a rookie or starting a rookie on the outside. He's done it before. And so I do think Azareye'h Thomas will get that starting spot on the outside. So with that in mind, you're wondering, okay, well, what happens to all the money you spent on Stevens? This is where I think it gets interesting. I think that you go Cisco Stevens on the back end at safety, with Stevens rotating with Malachi Moore, and then we get to the slot. So as much as Malachi Moore was a day 3 pick, and you can say like, oh, day 3 sometimes means they're going to take a little bit of a while to develop. Malachi Moore is ready. He's ready to go. He had a lot of playing experience at Alabama. He's been playing since I think freshman year. Like, he's ready to go. He'll be playing. I think what you're going to likely see is he's going to be rotating in at safety with Stevens, and then that nickel role. So I think you're going to see Michael Carter, and I think you're going to see Malachi Moore rotating in that nickel role. I think that this, I know that might sound annoying because it might sound like Michael Carter's not going to get as much playing time as before, but I think that's just the way that their defense is. If you notice the way that he uses Brian Branch in the nickel, used a couple other bigger DBs in that nickel role. Michael Carter can tackle. Michael Carter's a great nickel corner, but I think he doesn't necessarily meet those physical requirements that it seems like the Lions tended to have for that role. And so I do think that it could be a rotation of him and Malachi Moore. Malachi Moore's not necessarily like that much bigger, but I think that he just plays the game a little bit more physically. And he's used to playing, rotating in the box and all the things that, he did at Alabama a little earlier before DeBoer came in. He kind of took more of a traditional safety role. So that's what I think it would look like. What do you think about that potentially?
Yeah, so I think trying to map out the trades is good. We pulled some numbers from the Lions defense over the past 2 seasons, and I spent all morning kind of carving up this chart, looking at numbers, and at this point they look like the Carrie Matheson's wall in Homeland with thread all over the place and my handwriting all over it. And so I'm trying to pull out some nuggets here of what I think could possibly be going on. And so when we're talking about specifically that nickel role, that slot corner role, the leader over the last 2 seasons in slot corner reps was Brian Branch.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a safety, right? And so the secondary, the second person with the most nickel snaps was Amik Robertson, who's a smaller corner. He's like a 5'10" corner.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have those physical skills. And I think that when you look at these numbers as a whole, it seems that Aaron Glenn wants to move the safeties all over the place. They're playing in the box. They're playing at edge. They're blitzing. They're moving up. They're moving back. They're playing in the slot. Whereas his corners are really just kind of doing one thing. They're staying on the outside and they're covering. They're manning up, and that's what they're doing. And so the slot corner numbers themselves, out of a possible, I think, like something like 4,500 defensive snaps, there was a slot corner on the field for 2,200-ish of them. And out of those 2,200 snaps, 57% of the time it was a safety in the slot. 25% of the time it was a corner in the slot. And interestingly, 20% of the time it was a linebacker or an edge in the slot. Which is a wrinkle that we haven't even really approached yet. And again, with the cornerbacks, like it's a statistically insignificant number of them doing anything except just playing on the outside and manning up.
Yeah.
They're only in the box like 6% of the time. They're almost never blitzing from the corner. If there is a blitz from the secondary, it's generally coming from the safeties moving up into the box.
Yeah.
And they're only playing out in the slot like 13% of the corner snaps. I know that's a different percentage than I gave of the slot snaps before, but of the corner snaps, they're only in the slot about 13% of the time. So some pretty interesting stuff here. I think, again, I think that your guess on the rotation is probably pretty close. Like it's probably going to be Sauce and AZ on the outside. And then it's these other 4 guys between Cisco, Moore, Carter. And I don't think you're going to see Carter float back to safety by any means. I think he stays in the slot. But it's Cisco, Moore, Carter, and Stevens who are going to be a little bit more versatile. And let's move them all over the field. And maybe we have 1 blitz and 2 hang back. And we're going to do all kinds of crazy things with those guys. One other thing that you and I texted about last night was the thought of this versatility at safety versus what needs to be happening on the rest of the defense in order to enable that, right? So if you're going to be doing that, what's happening in the middle? How are you stopping the run? All that stuff. And over the past 2 years, in 2023, the Lions gave up 3.7 yards a carry, which was 3rd in the NFL. It's pretty good. In 2024, they gave up 4.5 yards a carry, which was behind the Jets, who
Yeah.
were notoriously bad in run defense. So they took a pretty big slide back. And so one thing that I thought was interesting that we pulled out here was that out of the 1,500-ish run snaps that the defense took, there was only a strong safety on the field for about 13% of the time, which is
Mm.
pretty small, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think in terms of the secondary, this plan? What else needs to happen, whether it be in the middle with the defenders or with the linebackers? Like, how does it all play together with the run defense?